So, the Pixel 7 has been out for a while, and it's probably no surprise, but I like it. I already liked the Pixel 6, but it did have some flaws, so the Google fixed them. Let's start with the fingerprint sensor. There was a lot said about this thing's fingerprint scanner, and it was kinda whack because it wasn't very fast. It did improve a bit over time with updates. That said, the fingerprint scanner on the 7 is noticeably faster, and it also has a less secure face unlock, which just uses your front facing camera to recognize you. This is the ideal setup in my opinion, a secure fingerprint scanner and face unlock just for convenience. Ideally, they'd both be secure, but for now that brings the drawback of needing a bigger hole punch or notch, and I'm notch about that. The front facing camera was also slightly improved. The bezels on the display were slightly reduced, but they're still not uniform like they were on the Pixel 5, which is a real shame, because it's something that really elevates the look of a phone in my opinion. Still slow as heck charging like it was on the Pixel 6. Some new software features like photo and blur, which can improve your old autofocus shots, and works really well actually. Snoring detection, and a new and improved camera UI, which lets you lock exposure and brings back the old double tap to zoom shortcut. Quick side note, I don't know if it used to be like this, but I noticed the double tap to zoom doesn't always zoom in the same fixed amount. It tries to guess what you're trying to frame and zoom in accordingly. Pretty cool. But going back to what I was saying, I'm expecting these features to come down to older Pixels, as the processing power isn't crucial to them working properly. We already got the snoring detection and the smart double tap to zoom, but nothing else. They're taking their sweet time. Other changes include slightly improved cameras, improved displays, which on the regular 7 is actually a big deal. I hear it doesn't have display uniformity issues anymore, but yeah, it's an iterative upgrade. Still, if you're thinking of buying a Pixel, it makes a lot more sense to get a 7 than it does a 6. Unless you get a really good deal on a Pixel 6, that kinda goes without saying. But this is to be expected. No one was expecting the 7 to be worse than the 6. The real question here is how has the 6 held up over this past year? You may recall there were some software bugs in the beginning. Some people had it really bad from what they were reporting. I did have a couple of random reboots back when I first got this phone, but that got fixed in the second monthly update back in December. The thing is, that update got pulled and was only released a month after. It could have been handled better, but it wasn't as bad as some people made it out to be. After that, software has been pretty good for me, now with Android 13, which I quite like. There hasn't been any sort of slowdown in responsiveness, which I was kinda scared of coming into a Pixel, since we've heard a lot of people talk about that in previous phones. Maybe I got lucky, maybe it'll still show up down the line, maybe it's Maybelline, but for now, it gets my stamp of approval. There are still some bugs, there always are, but nothing that would put me off from using or buying this phone. Ignoring those from the first few months, over the more than a full year that I've had this phone for, I've had one time where the camera processing went wonky and stretched the person that was closer to the edge in a group selfie. Really weird. There were 2 times when taking a lot of pictures in succession where the phone just shut off and showed the updating screen. You can't imagine how I felt when this first happened. I thought the phone had bricked itself. Eventually, it did shut off completely and I was able to turn it back on. Both of those times, the last picture I took before the phone shut off were not saved. This hasn't happened in recent months, so maybe Google has fixed it. It's hard to tell because I can't really reproduce it. And I also gotta mention, auto-rotate in this thing sucks. In some apps, I keep having to do this movement for it to recognize I want to rotate my phone. Even with all this, I would still say software is one of the big reasons to get this phone. It's simple, sometimes to a fault, it still has a couple of features one may consider basic which are missing, like double tap to sleep, but it does have some really unique smart functionalities which come in handy, especially if you're in the US. A lot of these smart features aren't available everywhere, which is a real shame. Nonetheless, outside the US, you still get stuff like the recorder, which transcribes everything you say, and Magic Eraser, which now has a camouflage feature. You also can ignore one of Google's big advantages here, the updates. You're one of the first in line to get security patches every month for 5 years and Android version upgrades for 3 years. It also has an easily unlockable bootloader, which is great when talking about longevity. And since my review, Google has also partnered with iFixit to offer official parts to end consumers for prices that seem reasonable. That's awesome. I would like to see some more parts made available though. For now, we can't get something like the back glass, which breaks a lot, but it's a great start. We still haven't hit one of the big topics with the Pixel 6 cell reception. Now, I've never used 5G with this phone. It supports 5G and I have a 5G plan, but since Google doesn't sell this phone officially in my country, I can't get 5G. Stupid stuff. I can't really comment on that, but I have noticed the modem on this thing likes to get stuck a lot. When I get no signal, it likes hanging on to that no signal. When I'm on 3G, it likes staying there and not jumping over to 4G. Sometimes it doesn't even connect at all. It's not the end of the world, and usually turning airplane mode on and off fixes this, but it's annoying. Supposedly the Pixel 7 fixes this, but I don't know. Switching up to one of the biggest positives in this phone, let's talk about the cameras. I fell in love with the cameras in this phone. I was used to having to take a lot of pictures just to get one good one with my old phone, but this one is consistently great. In my review, I mentioned I didn't feel like the ultra-wide was on par with the main sensor just because of how great it was, but that has sort of been a blessing in disguise. The main sensor in this thing is pretty big for a phone, so when you're taking a portrait of someone, you get a nice blurred background. It looks great, but if you also want the background to be in focus, you're out of luck. You can't really turn it on and off. What I found works best is slightly zooming out, so you switch over to the ultra-wide, which has a smaller sensor, so you can get everything in focus. Performance with Tensor has never been a problem, and same for the battery. Even after Android 13, it still lasts me through a full day with some to spare, just like it did when I made my full review. Look, I liked the Pixel 6 last year, even if I thought it was maybe a bit too expensive at the full asking price, at least in Europe. And I still like it if you can find a good deal on it. And I also like the Pixel 7, which, with its iterative upgrades and all this inflation going on, now feels like it's coming in at a fitting price, maybe even leaning into the pretty good deal territory. There's one thing I liked better about the 6, and that's the colorways. But I do love this hazel the 7 Pro comes in, it's gorgeous. It's worrying that the metal frame scratches so easy though, and if you're someone who doesn't usually wear a case and are thinking of getting a Pro in particular which has a shiny metal frame, you should be aware of this. So at this point, if you're thinking of getting a 6, you might be better off getting a 7, and if you already have a 6, it doesn't make much sense to upgrade to a 7, they're still very similar at the end of the day. Love you, bye, subscribe, I'll see you next time.